Hi, I am delighted to be joined today by Ivana Bartoletti, who is the Chief Global Privacy Officer at WePro and also a respected writer and academic. Ivana, welcome.
Thank you so much. Really delighted to be here.
Excellent. And it's been a long time in the making, this video, so we have so much to talk about. Now, you're considered an expert in the area of ethics and AI, which seems like an enormous topic. How would you explain it to somebody who hadn't even approached that topic before?
Thank you for this great question. Artificial intelligence holds a lot of promise to make our life better in medicine, in science, in the environment. There are so many things that AI can help us with, and this is really fantastic. But at the same time, we cannot afford for AI to go wrong, because if it goes wrong, what can happen is that AI and algorithms, for example, can automate the existing inequalities that we've got in society. We hear a lot about, for example, algorithmic bias. So to an extent, we do not want artificial intelligence to be a social experiment on our society and on people and on our environment. We want it to go well. And this is where the discussion around ethics, but not just around ethics, the discussion around the law and regulation around AI, this is where it all comes in. It comes in because we want artificial intelligence to work for society. And therefore, to do so, we have to be very careful of the risks, and we have to be able to manage them.
Yes, it's fascinating, isn't it? In this day and age, our laws and regulations have to keep up with developments in technology and AI. And I wonder how well we're doing with that at the moment. But how do you think privacy law is upholding those fundamental rights currently?
It's really interesting. At the moment, there is a lot of happening in the space of AI regulation. Now, it's very difficult to say regulate AI, because if I asked you, what does it mean to regulate AI? It's such a broad question, and we don't really perhaps regulate artificial intelligence as such. We maybe regulate the behavior of people around artificial intelligence and the products and how we deal with the products. So at the moment, there is so much happening all around the world. There are strategies. Every single country around the world that's got an AI strategy. In the European Union, there is a European AI Act. A lot of work is a European AI Act, which has been discussed. In the UK, a lot of work is going into, for example, the CDI in relation to algorithms used in the public sector. In the US, you have the FTC really stressing the importance of algorithms that do not discriminate, especially in the financial sector. And then you have legislation like in China and in India and in Brazil, where the issue of algorithmic decision making and transparency, they are very much relevant. And it is in the field of privacy legislation, which is about the right for individuals to privacy and autonomy and dignity, that there's a lot of discussions happening around how does the GDPR, but not just the GDPR, how does privacy law relate to artificial intelligence when we're talking about individual data? And we have seen some interesting developments in this space. We have seen data protection authorities saying to organizations, hey, you haven't done a data privacy impact assessment, therefore that is wrong, because if you had done a data protection impact assessment, you would have noticed the potential of bias and discrimination in the algorithm before actual deployment. So we are seeing in interesting developments showing us that the privacy law and data protection law, they can really play an important role. AI does not exist in isolation. And so privacy legislation, non-discrimination law, consumer legislation, they all apply. And therefore, it's really important for organizations to embed all of these in their strategies, in the products they are creating and developing.
We haven't decided to talk about this previously, but I was wondering if you could speak a little on how these sort of high-level conversations about bias affect the individual, the sort of regular person on the street.
Well, yes, I mean, we've seen some interesting stories over recent times. Coded Bias, and an amazing film on Netflix, and I really encourage everyone to watch it. And it's an amazing film that shows how facial recognition technology can be extremely harmful And one of the reasons why it's harmful is that it discriminates against women of color. And this is really terrible, if you can imagine, because it means that the system is so prone to errors and mistakes, and that's not fair. But we have seen stories of AI used in algorithmic decision making, for example, in human resources, and discriminating against women. We've seen adverts of highly paid jobs being served to men, because historically men earn more than women. And we have seen in the UK, in England, not long ago, for the A-levels exams, we have seen an algorithm being deployed to predict the grade of the students, and that algorithm automatically giving a higher grade to students coming from private education than to students coming from state education, regardless of their background. So the issue of bias in artificial intelligence, which is actually the risk of automating the existing inequalities that we have in society right now, is an issue that is very much spoken about. And is an issue that is becoming more mainstream than it used to be. And this is happening on a daily basis, because people are realizing that actually we want to use these systems. We want to automate. Technology is fantastic, but we do not want these systems to automate the bad things. We want these systems to help us go to a more progressive and positive future. So the issue of bias affects us all. And some people say, well, individuals are biased, so why do you worry about a machine being biased? Main difference there is that with automating these inequalities, becomes more difficult to identify where the bias is, and becomes more difficult to spot the bias, and much more difficult once these things get automated, and once algorithms are increasingly used for allocation, for decision making, it becomes much more difficult for the individual to understand and take on an organization or a decision should they feel that they've been discriminated. So we have to be very careful about all this. But I think bias is one of the topics that is becoming more and more mainstream, and people are becoming more and more aware of the risks that we're running.
Yes, that's very interesting in terms of talking about systemic bias and bias in society, and how when we deal with AI, we can't actually see it physically in such an obvious way. Wow. And obviously, dealing with bias also, it's important to have diversity in leadership, in the workforce, actually working within AI. So I wonder, I know you work with women in tech a lot, and I wonder if you could speak a little on how more minority groups are being supported to work in AI, if it's happening, and what's happening at the moment about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great topic, because in a few years ago, just before International Women's Day, actually, with a group of women, we were talking about the progress that we've made, in terms of women's rights, and in particular looking at intersectionality and what does it, do we have how far are we in terms of having a real intersectional movement, and we were thinking of artificial intelligence and bias and a few people we have in technology, but not just in technology, also in decision-making spaces, where the decisions around how to use AI are made, and how little diversity there is in this space. And we were saying, oh wow, we've been trying to improve and to move towards a better future, and now we've got artificial intelligence, and we're going to automate a lot of things that they're not going well, and we wondered whether there was a way to actually use all of this to code a better world, really.
Wow.
So we started the Women Leading Artificial Intelligence Network, which is going strength to strength, and in particular thanks to some amazing women that have been leading this movement. And I'm thinking about Joy Buolamwini, Sophia Noble, Kate Crawford in the US, and so many around the world, these women who have been fantastic and pioneers in this space, really recognizing much earlier than anyone else that technology is not neutral, that behind an algorithm as Cathy O'Neill says, there is an opinion which then it becomes expressed in the code. So there is nothing neutral in this technology. This technology is expressed and created by human beings. You know, they're mostly male and mostly white. So that is the reason why there has been a big movement in this space, and not just in the UK, not just in Europe, in the US, but increasingly around the world, to say, hey, we need more women in these technologies. But also, it's not just about coding. It's also about women in leadership position where the decisions are made around AI. So one of the things that we do as women leading in AI is to ensure that we have a strong voice around policy. So, for example, when we talk about what are the policies around artificial intelligence in Europe with the Artificial Intelligence Act, or with the Council of Europe, or within the UNESCO, we want a lot of women to make this decision, shaping the future, because, you know, AI requires global regulation, requires a global outlook, but you know, we have to make sure that that outlook is really diverse, and especially looking at the people who are going to be impacted the most.
Wow, okay. Fascinating on a number of levels, but I'm just wondering about the access points for younger women looking to get into AI. Do you think they're there? Do you think our educational institutions are supporting women to go into careers in AI?
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly it's very cultural. If you ask me, I've just come back from a trip to Saudi Arabia, and I was in Riyadh for a conference and some meetings. And I just visited the Women Business Park, which is a joint venture between my company and the Noura University in Riyadh, a university of 45,000 women, and a university where we are training thousands of women to work in the AI space. The reason why I'm saying this is because the origin of why we have so little women in technology in the West is very unique to the world we live in. A long time ago, and I talk about this in my book, a long time ago, coding was very much of a female thing. It was seen a little bit like knitting. So it was very much secretarial work.
I see.
And then what happened was that when society became more datafied, when the power of data came into full force, suddenly, the role of data handling and coding became very managerial, and therefore it turned into men suited and booted. And so once it became a cool activity, then it became more male dominated. That is the history of women's rights, if you think about it. Sure. So the reason why I'm saying this is because we have two issues here. One is this cultural element in breaking up the barrier between technical and non-technical education. We still live in this world where, you know, AI is not just about technology. AI is about power. AI is about ethics. It's about philosophy. It's about mathematics. It's all of it together. It's about politics. You know, it's all of it together. So we have to break that silo culture, you know, where there is technology, and then there is everything else. It's not like this. Things are more and more intertwined, and there is no clear cut off. And this is very much of a cultural thing. And the other thing that we have to do, I think, is to ensure that we have all these possibilities for women to get into the sector, but we have to create pathways at different ages as well. You know, it's not just about young women. It's also about women coming back from maternity leave. It's also about women wanting to retrain later on. In AI, we really need all sorts of backgrounds, not just one specific background. So it's really important that we open doors from all different sectors. And the other thing is that what we need really, in my view, is we need leaders able to understand where to use AI and when not to use AI. Because there is so much glamour, there's so much hype around artificial intelligence, and everything is cool, but not everything is cool. Not everything needs to be requires artificial intelligence. Not everything requires the latest gadget. So having this strategic approach is really, really important. So we do need women in coding, but we need women in diverse leadership in making decisions in the top companies, you know, that is really important for countries' growth, is to have leaders in able to drive organizations, not just code.
Indeed. Diversity at the top is obviously going to be a huge discussion point at Tech Show London. I can envision it right now. And it's interesting what you said about how AI is embedded in every important area of industry at the moment. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it in relation to sustainability too. Are there any other sort of panels and topics occurring at the conference in terms of the implementation of AI that you're particularly looking forward to?
Well, I have to be honest. I mean, I'm interested in two things. First is Tim Berners-Lee, obviously, because you know, the reason why I'm interested in listening to him is because, of course, when the web started, it started with a promise of democracy and unifying the world, and so many things have changed. You know, so there is still their spirit a lot, but at the same time, a lot of that has been betrayed by an architecture which hasn't often worked. And now we're waking up to this. You know, we're waking up to the fact that, hey, we've got to put a little bit of control around this. So that is one element. And the other element is that I'm interested in really is to talk with people working in the AI space, because after this pandemic, I was saying, you know, I've been in one conference in over 2 years, and there is nothing that can replace that human contact. And you know, events on Zoom have been great, but you know, there is nothing as pleasurable and as important than, you know, the communication face to face.
Absolutely, and you have so much to offer in terms of insight and potential routes in the future. And I'm just wondering, as an end note, if you were given the opportunity to give advice to a world leader, one sentence of advice regarding ethical use of AI, what would you say?
I would say, look at sustainability. I would say to a world leader, I would say to her, you know, AI can help a better environment. We need to use it. But I would also say, let's create sustainable AI, because AI also consumes a lot of energy, needs a lot of computation, and we have to respect the environment. So I would say to them, look, you know, artificial intelligence is fantastic. Let's make the most of it, but let's not be blinded. AI needs to be sustainable for our society, for social justice, and for our environment too.
Excellent. Wow, that's amazing rhetoric, especially as it's improvised. So yes, any world leaders watching, please take note. Ivana, thank you very much indeed for joining us at Techorati. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks to you for having me.